Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady with Bloomberg Business Week, and welcome to our panel on women, economic power, and leadership. Is the story being told? So first, everybody who's against gender diversity, raise your hands. Wait. One in the back, no. But we have a terrific panel. We're going to be talking a lot about the economic case for gender equality and also a lot about the media and the story and how we're telling it. I'm going to introduce our panel. At the end, we have Matt Winkler, who is, he's my boss. He's the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg News. Matt, hello. Helena Morrissey, who is CEO of Newton Investment Management, also founder of the 30% Club. I'm not sure who saw the news, but there is now a U.S. version of the 30% Club that the news came out today that was launched, so that's interesting to talk about. We have Sally Krawcheck, who is not the CEO of 85 Broad. She is the business leader / owner of 85 Broads. Many of you know her. Molly Ashby, founder and CEO, so own that title. Solera Capital, and Chris Ailman, Chief Investment Officer for the California State Teachers Retirement System, fondly known as CalSTRS. So thank you. And Matt, for career preservation reasons, I'm going to start with you. But I think because we're talking a lot about the story, I want to ask, you co-founded Bloomberg News in 1990. 22 decades later, we have a women's initiative. Why now? And can you tell us a little bit about what difference you think it's made in terms of how we've been approaching the news? Because I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it.
Okay, well, it was born out of frustration because as we evolved, and evolved rather rapidly to being in 72 countries, 150 bureaus, 5,000 stories a day, and something that really unsettled me was that when I read our stories every day, and they were pretty good, getting better all the time, but they were far too often, without women voices. And it just didn't make sense given my own experience. And so this was beginning to disturb me greatly. And at the same time, I was also concerned with a lack of senior management who are women when we were developing very nicely, and yet there was a gender gap that was noticeable. So I noticed it, one, in the work that we produced, and then in the way we managed our work. And then finally, just covering the world, it was becoming increasingly apparent that wherever poverty is greatest, the gender gap is widest. And so if one is really committed to reporting on the world as it is, there has to be, a commitment to address that fundamental reality of poverty and gender gap going together. And so I was fortunate in that there were several amazing people at Bloomberg News at the time who I could discuss this with, and one of them is Lisa Kastnauer. And as we started talking about this, it became clear that what we needed to do is something that was really universal in approach, that we would deal with our work every day, that we would deal with the way we go about hiring people and the way we go about promoting people, and that there had to be, from the top, not a woman's group per se, but a Bloomberg News initiative, which is what it became, and 4 years ago. And it got stronger, of course, because it was entirely sponsored by me. And with a lot of help from a lot of people at Bloomberg, led by Lisa. And so that's where it all began.
So because I'm going to talk about the metrics of success for 30% Club, before we move on, because it's 4 years later, can you tell us what difference has it made? Is it too early to tell? Do you feel it's made a big difference?
Yeah, well, for one thing, we identified all kinds of amazing achievements and successes that are stories, a lot more stories. One of them is sitting right beside me, Helena Morrissey. And you know, in 2010, I would say we were probably the first of any major news organization to address what she has done with this whole issue of underrepresentation on boards. We doubled, I think, the number of women team leaders managing Bloomberg News in that span. We increased dramatically the number of managing editors and executive editors. Last year, for the first time in the history of Bloomberg News, most of the headcount of Bloomberg News reports to a woman, and is really not just reporting to one woman, but reporting to many women. The stories that we are able to report on recently have come entirely out of, I think, the Women's Initiative. One recent example is, if we didn't have it, it's not clear that our reporters covering the transportation industry and focusing, in fact, on the emergence of GM out of bankruptcy would have spent the time thinking about succession. And in the course of that, early last year, several editorial board meetings, meeting Mary Barra, and our team thinking as a result she was a likely, very likely successor to become CEO. And in fact, that enabled us to break that story. Another big story that I would say also came out of the Women's Initiative is, as we're covering Japan, we're covering South Korea, we're covering a lot of developed countries that are handicapped or disadvantaged by the aging population, and at the same time the low labor participation of women in the workforce. And as a result of that, we focused on a woman who actually grew up in California, Kathy Matsui, who is now a senior portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs. And in 1999, she developed what is now known as Womenomics. And Womenomics essentially says that where women have the most opportunity and freedom, they're likely to be in the workforce, and surprise, surprise, they're also likely to have families as well. And by focusing on what she was doing, it enabled us to get a jump on a bigger story, which is Whither Japan. And the current prime minister, as recently as I think 2 months ago in the Wall Street Journal, said that a big part of his campaign to change Japan for the better is Womenomics, and of course he cited Kathy Matsui. So I would say all of these things, hiring, the work that we do, dealing with the biggest challenges of the global economy, you could argue came from what we started with the Women's Initiative. Okay.
Helena, 30% Club, you've called it a soft power initiative. What does that mean, first of all, and why bother? Why did you feel a need to start this?
Okay, well, one question at a time. So the soft power, I mean, literally means trying to affect change through getting people to want what you want. So it doesn't become, telling people what to do. This is actually trying to achieve a goal through having people genuinely believe that it's something that would be beneficial to them as well. And certainly in the UK, it has, in all honesty, exceeded my expectations about how this approach has worked. 3.5 years ago, when we launched, there were 12.5% women on FTSE boards, and we're now just under 21%. And just like the US, we'd seen a sort of plateauing at, it's gone from 11.5, 12.5 in the preceding 3 years. So the pickup, the acceleration in the pace of change really has been dramatic. And what you've had, to be honest, the chairman, whose boards they are, obviously, have been the ones leading the charge. It hasn't been perceived, or it's no longer perceived in the UK as a women's issue. It's not seen as a special interest or political correctness or any of those softer, dare I say, issues, but actually almost imperative part of having a modern, effective board. And that's been a dramatic change. I can say from personal experience writing to chairman back in 2010, asking them to join initially, that was not necessarily the general view. But a few things have changed since then, and actually the best advocates for others in this campaign have been, again, the chairman. We all know that these very powerful people, enjoy being in each other's circle and feeling, if one's doing something, what is it about that? And it has proved to be a much more effective lever. I have to say as well, having a measurable goal. I'm very anti-quotas, and I'm happy for us to have a discussion about that, but I'm very anti-quotas, the opposite of the soft power approach. But actually having something that you could measure has really focused the mind. And one of my hopes, I mean, I'm very conscious there are a lot of initiatives in the US, not trying to second guess any of those or divide or conquer or anything, but just hopefully to add an element of a cohesion, to have the leadership of the CEOs and chairmen really visibly setting a different course going forward, and also to have a different discussion around it, more about the business case and less about sort of nice to have and more about absolutely essential.
So, Sally, I want to ask you about 85 Broads, because you've had a career, obviously, on Wall Street. Many people know you from your days, Bank of America, you know, Citi and such. So, first of all, why 85 Broads, and what are you planning to do with it? I think there's a lot of curiosity about that. Since we're talking about the business case for women, it's something that you talked about when you were buying it.
Sure. Well, it's the to be renamed 85 Broads.
Is it?
Oh, yes. And stay tuned. And Helena talked about the positive impact of diversity on boards, and I fully agree with that 100%. I would add to it, I'm thinking a lot about the positive impact of gender diversity in senior management, you know, where the thousands and thousands and thousands of micro decisions that impact business and culture are taken. 85 Broads is a professional women's network. The research, I'm a recovering research analyst, demonstrates that the #1 unwritten rule of success in businesses is in your network, who you know. And not the schmoozing who do you know, but what's your, you know, what nerves do you have out there that can bring you back business information that can help you know about the promotion, know about the board position that's open, know about the terrific individual who's looking for a job, know about the acquisition, et cetera. So with a combination of networking and education to help women help themselves up the ladder, 85 Broads, I think, does a great job. But this stuff matters. So to take a step back, the research shows that companies with more gender diversity have higher returns on equity, lower volatility, lower risk, better stockholder returns, better client focus, more long-term perspective, greater innovation, that the power of diversity is so great that diverse teams outperform more capable and smarter teams.
I want to stop you right there just for 1 sec, which
Yes.
is that I feel like that I know that, and I feel like to some extent the business case has been repeated a lot. So part of it is, why is that not motivating change?
Because Matt and I were talking about this earlier. That's in theory, right? How do you know what the different path would have been? If your company's stock was up 10% last year, would it have been up 12%, 15%, 20% if you had a more diverse group? But I firmly and passionately believe, having worked on Wall Street, which has less gender diversity than most of us would like, and has gone backwards post the downturn, that the downturn would have played out differently to very differently had there been more diverse leadership teams. And I've worked in diverse leadership teams. I've worked with less diverse leadership teams, and all that stuff I just talked about, that greater client focus, the more long-term focus, the lower volatility, is something I think everyone in this room and everyone listening should care about a lot as we think about those firms. So, you know, I've started to say, for years when people said, Sally, did you get sent home from Citigroup because you're a woman? For years I said no. And I'm getting to the point where I'm saying, well, not exactly. Not exactly. It wasn't because I had girl cooties, but I did work to return client funds. And as I've gained some perspective on that over time, and I've sort of had the emotion stripped out of it, you say, boy, all the research says this is pretty female. The client focus, the long-term focus. And so I think we'd be in a different place on Wall Street if we had more gender diversity. So
now with do you see this? You invest in firms that are often run by women. You've got a diverse team yourself. So what was the market opportunity you saw in starting Solera, first of all? And why did you make women a focus?
So I guess a couple of reasons there. First of all, the business case, just to get that over with, because it's a business conference. But,
Yes, we're about invest. Where do you put your money? That's an important decision.
Well, the business case is obviously really profound in terms of, and when I was starting Solera, I'd come out of a really great mainstream background and had learned the business. And so I just was riveted by the concept that the world around us was really changing. There was the rise of women and diversity in businesses, in entrepreneurship, in the ranks of main large corporations. But there was this fantastic mismatch, which in our business you love to see all day, which was that was not represented within the private equity industry. So to go off Sally's comment on networks really matter, so the business interesting opportunity was, wow, we could build a really mainstream organization that does first-class business, that intends to really be engaged in all of these networks of 51% of the population, right? The giant numbers around us. And because there were no firms, look at that not as a problem, it is a problem, but look at it in that construct as a really amazing opportunity to go and to be able to build great businesses and to do it equally important to us with a really strong sense of values. We're a very value-driven organization that includes diversity and mentorship and inclusion.
And how are you covered then? Do you feel you're covered as, Molly Ashby, women-owned business, investing in Annie's? In terms of the coverage of that gender being the lens through which you do a lot of the investing, since we're talking about the story being told here.
Here's what's interesting. So for the first several years, because we've always had, we've never been 100% women within the organization, and nor would I be. I wouldn't aim to be 100% anything. And so we have a rule in our firm, if you put the word man where you might be tempted to say woman, and it sounds funny, it's telling you something, right? So we would never say, I'll only do a business run by a man, right? Who would say that? So it's wrong. So we just think of it as we are just so intensely inclusive and focused, and we get the consumer, and our team just looks really like the world around us. So we tend to get all the inflow of women diversity. But my first several years, people would say, will you invest in women? And I would get, because I'm an investment professional first and foremost, right? And so that's just wrong. You don't use gender as an investment criteria. That would not fit right. So we spent a lot of time saying, no, we're not, no, we're not, no, we're not. And probably a bit like Sally, the comment, which was, we kind of just say, we actually have a lot of women. We really love the woman consumer. And it's okay if you want to call us that. We're cool with it. We just really want to be a modern firm that looks like the world around us and has a real special expertise in understanding kind of these constituents.
Okay.
One thing I would add, though, because I just should put it right out there, so when I started Solera in like '99, I had a small daughter, and I was motivated by that. I'm just going to say that I kind of looked at that and said, if I'm going to be doing something in the workplace, and because the world has been kind to me, and I might have some options of what those choices could be, right? Not everybody has those options, but I felt maybe I had an option to be able to go and start a firm. I really was looking at her and saying, I've got to deliver to you. I need to deliver something that I can look you in the face and say, this is what I was doing when I was, when I was kind of not with you. So that's.
So Chris, when I talk, shareholder activists, they go into a boardroom and they've got 12 complaints. Maybe women on the board is 13, but I've never heard it raised as an issue, in terms of you need more women on your board from an investment perspective. CalSTRS has made that something that is important. Is it because, 72% of your members are women? Is it that you see a business case? And do you feel utterly alone or somewhat, do you feel the group is expanding in terms of people actually making investment decisions based on this? And
I would say, challenging question. We somewhat do feel alone, which is surprising. We think there would be more people supporting this as a primary effort. You're right, that people have a list of priorities, and gender isn't always right at the top of their list. But for us, it is partly because you said 72% of our membership is female. We get it, but I think it's just what Sally said, the words you heard on the panel, and I think most of the audience would recognize more sustainability, more diverse points of view, diverse thought, We've often used that story because it catches in people's minds. And back to your point about the '08 crisis, if it had been Lehman Sisters rather than Lehman Brothers, would the outcome be different? But
Or
we
Lehman
think.
siblings.
Pardon me?
Lehman siblings.
The
Lehman
Lehman
siblings,
family.
yeah.
Yes.
You know, and I think the challenge is we see Wall Street as committing way too much groupthink, just as if, and so my word picture for you would be, if you had a company you were looking at, it's run by a woman, but the entire board is white male and look like me. They're old and bald and ugly. And I said that, well, I know, for you, but it's true.
Oh, wait.
But
Not so ugly.
yeah,
You're
thanks.
handsome.
Let's not go there. If I said that company solely focused in women's cosmetics, you'd scratch your head and go, that's got to be crazy. Take it another way. If there was a company that only made men's youth clothes, boys' clothes, and it's 100% women, and there's only one man on the board or running the company, you'd say the same thing. That just doesn't necessarily fit all that well. Why isn't it more diverse? So it's right on the point where the group is saying it's breaking groupthink, it's getting more perspectives. We think it just is natural to see more of a diverse dialogue. And part of the challenge, which we see, and I think you've hit on it, is women who have succeeded not turning around and putting their hand back and helping somebody else up the ladder. We've held conferences for women in Wall Street, and I'm amazed how many don't, they recognize each other from college or by reputation, but they don't network and they don't talk. You can look at different ethnic groups that are really small parts of the population that are really powerful, and the one key message out of all of their success is networking, reaching out and helping one another. I'm pleased to say that over half of the investment staff at CalSTRS is female. I've always been lucky enough that my best mortgage traders have always been women. They just think better. They think more holistically, and to us, the real focus.
You're imbuing us with special qualities. That's good.
I'm smart enough. I'm smart enough to know that is true.
Well,
people have more intuition. They have, and it's personality traits, not just gender, that drives people. And the key is in investments. It's such a challenging world. You've got to have a diverse thought process going on.
Well, so diverse, and I want to get Matt weigh in on this, and I want everybody to weigh in on the idea of gender being the focus, because when you put the word women on it, then you're looking at it, you're basically saying this is about women, this is about coverage of women. Even talk about, you've got a network of 2,400 people in Bloomberg News. How do you turn around this ship? Does it become oh, right, I better write about a woman? I don't want Lisa to call me. How does it feel like in terms of actually changing the culture around this? Because you say women, sometimes you lose people hello, right?
Okay, well, I specifically put it in the context of smarter, faster, better, meaning that a whole universe, if you will, of great stories was, to say the least, obscured, if not ignored. And by having the initiative that we undertook, we suddenly were much more competitive. How's that? We were suddenly breaking news that would become other people's front pages very soon. And that speaks to a lot of what has already been said here, which is what this really is about is better performance, really is what this is about, better performance, a better economy, a better world. And surely every journalist who is committed wants all of those things and is pursuing those things. And so guess what? Women are right there in the middle of it all. And so if you show people that you're going to write your best stories by paying attention, you're going to break more news, you're going to become more influential, it starts to sink in. And that's exactly what has unfolded. And it's not to say that we've done everything we should do. We have a long way to go here. But we've started something that has its own momentum now. And there's no turning back. And everybody, I think, gets it.
Okay.
And I would add, I think the key is you have to be intentional. You can't, it would be
Which is
nice to
why
not be
women is-
confrontational.
Right.
It would be nice to have a soft approach, but I think it has to be intentional. I know when we've done searches, and I just went through this occurrence, so I want to share it. 2 other people on the panel helping me find a director for us are women. And we talked to the headhunter, who was a lady. And I said, I want to make sure that half of this final group are women. And both of the ladies turned to me and said, no, we don't. We just want to make sure we get the most qualified candidates. And I said, within the most qualified candidates, we have to recognize and push to find the women. Because what we have found is that Wall Street is so male-dominated that women may not have had the chance to be in that senior role. And I'm willing to give a chance to a woman that maybe isn't already a director somewhere else, but a portfolio manager, and saying, let's see if that person can compete and step up. And sure enough, what we find is there's quality talent
I was
everywhere.
just going to
But
say,
here's
related to that,
the-
though, the key word here, and this is something that comes especially out of the Women's Initiative, is collaboration. And you want to talk about Wall Street culture, it's historically all about cowboys, if you'll forgive me. Whereas once you introduce women into the workplace, suddenly what you're going to find is a lot more collaborative behavior. And that's hugely important to success. When you have people working together as a team, not just in one place, but around the world, talking to each other, sharing ideas, that has made us much more competitive as a news organization because we're much more collaborative. And I don't think we would be where we are today if we hadn't had that.
So I'm jumping out of my seat.
Please, go.
I think some of the most dangerous words on Wall Street and in business are, but I just want to put the best person in the job. And we need to change it to, I want to put the best team in place. Because the best person in the job, I find when I'm looking for the best person in the job, she tends to be a middle-aged financial services female who's grown up in wealth management, right? It's me. And so then I really
want like a mini-me
believe
culture.
that those folks who are like me, they're super terrific. And what I can see is I can understand how they're going to do the job, right? I can envision it. And this not only is tough during regular times, but during periods of crisis when, boy, I need someone in the trenches with me I can really trust. We didn't go backwards with women on Wall Street, again, because of overt biases. We went back because I need someone I can trust. But it's a little bit like, I make the analogy since I'm a Chapel Hill basketball fan, and I won't take you through all the players, but by having people of a one type, it's like having a team full of point guards. They may all be great, and they may be the 5 best basketball players in the country. But with all point guards, you're never going to win the national championship. And so I really think we need to your point, consciously change it.
Well, and it's
Right?
a human
It's not gonna
instinct,
happen.
right? If you're a
It's not gonna
successful
happen.
person, it's like, you remind me of me at 23. So you want me, you want the mini-me's around you, and that you don't want that. You have to break out of the...
Right. And look, we're past it being a pipeline issue, right? There's plenty of pipeline. It is now a mentoring, sponsoring, motivating, choosing issue, as opposed to, if we can just wait a few more years, this will take care of itself.
But I want to put this, because we're talking about, is the story being told? Helena, talk about how this issue is covered in the UK and what you've observed in the US, even in terms of the coverage of you. 9 kids, I have to say it.
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up, but anyway.
But I think it's interesting when you look up the first thing people Google you, that's the first story.
9 kids.
The headline is, I thought we'd stop at 5. So you're like, that's almost the calling card that people say, oh, Helena Morris. How do you feel the coverage?
That's just fantastic.
And only one husband, too, by the way.
Yeah.
Establish that.
Wow.
Which is the more unusual thing. But anyway, to be honest, I don't actually mind too much in the sense that it is a big part of who I am.
Sure.
And I also
And your daughter is here, I think.
One of them, yes. I have 6 daughters, and one is in the audience. So one of the things I also hope, and I've realised over time, which is why I started to get involved in women's initiatives, really, was that no one ever puts themselves up as a role model, but I realised that it did encourage other younger women that were thinking of having children about, how do you manage it all, sort of thing. That cliche but real problem that we all struggle.
What about gender more generally? I mean, do you feel, in terms of how even the issue of women on boards is covered, there's a lot of frustration in the U.S. How do you feel the issue's been covered in the UK versus here? Or?
Well, interestingly, and I suppose it resonates with or echoes some of the points already made, that actually what it's done, the gender issue has prized open the lid on the cozy club that was the boardroom in the UK. So I think the combination of the focus, and it has been a huge media spotlight, and many thanks to Bloomberg for a huge part in that. It's very consistently in the news, this issue. It's not kind of here today, gone tomorrow. So that's been important. But what's happened is a combination of that and then the aftermath of the financial crisis, a real introspective time about what makes for an effective board. And Sally's point about actually it is an effective team that you're looking for. And I did interview the chairman recently from one of the large, big British banks, and he went through very candidly. He's chairman of one of the banks that failed in the financial crisis. So he started right from a carte blanche. He had the full 12 seats to fill. And he did talk about how the fact he didn't want everybody to have huge board experience. He wanted some people to ask the question that would be the new person coming to a board that might be asking what others might feel, oh, I better not step out of line, and challenge differently. He wanted people with international experience. He wanted introverts and extroverts. I mean, it was very conscious. Mm-hmm. And the headhunting community, the search firms, have initially, I think they were a little bit nervous about, the whole thing being thrown open, but actually have responded now very, very well and regard it as part of their job to sit down and talk about the intrinsic capabilities of the people that are being looked for the board. And it has completely blown open the candidates. I mean, in 2012, when women made up literally half of the new appointments to FTSE boards, 62% of them had never served on a public listed board before. And that was really surprising to me, that people would take that supposed risk of somebody breaking new ground and not being proven, now regarded as a bit more risky to have somebody or all the members who've kind of served, moved around as a pack together. And that's a big change. And I am conscious here that you have a much lower turnover on boards. You don't have fixed terms for directors like we do in the UK. The average tenure of a board director, non-exec, is double what it is in the UK. But I think there is a lot of consciousness on the part of chairs now that they need to work on how to refresh it, how to bring in talent. I am hoping, and the 30% Club in the US is not going to have a sole focus on boards. Sally's going to be also trying to help with the management teams as well, but I'm hoping that it would also have some impact on that issue about what is an effective board.
Well, and I would add, I think the real nuanced difference between the US and the UK is that CEOs in America control the companies, and they tend to control that selection process. And I think, frankly, I'm going to say it, they're not man enough to want to be challenged. Mm-hmm. They want to handpick people on their board that will answer to them. Oftentimes the CEO is the chair, which is another issue we fight to break up. We think there needs to be a little bit more tension, a little more give and take between management and the board. And we find that, I'll pick on Facebook as the example. We went public saying...
We did that story.
Yeah,
no women on the
Mark
board.
Zuckerberg, and there's no women on the board. I think it was 60% of the users are women. We embarrass him, and he throws one woman, his COO, on the board. Okay, well, there's
so
not independent and one woman. It takes two to make a motion. So to us, that was pathetic. And we just keep pounding on the boards, which is, if you want to really run this company well, we're going to hold you for 30 years. You need more points of view on the board and more of a sustainable attitude rather than, I'm going to pick, you mentioned cowboys. I think that if you can all picture the difference between cowboys and ranchers. So not a gender issue, but more a personality issue. We want less people who are focused on next quarter's earnings and more people who are worried about taking care of it and growing the company over 30 years.
But we always talk about the business case. Facebook was doing pretty well with no women on the board. ExxonMobil, companies like that, if they have no women in senior management, they seem to do okay. So why is it that it always has to perform better? Like, isn't it just good enough to not be worse? I mean, what is it like? Why do we have to be like 13% better than if you have all men? Like, why is that? That feels like a high bar to me.
Yeah,
and I don't think I would put on Sally's point, which is what we don't measure and don't know, is whether a diverse board would have avoided a risk. Would they have avoided the problem? Would they have asked more questions? So it is not that women on a board have to perform better. I think we use that to wake people up and to wake men up that, hey, if you really do want to perform and make money, then you need to tap into this talent and expand your board and extend your management. That's part of the problem. Is they tell us they want somebody with former board experience on the board, and they want somebody who might have been a CEO. There aren't enough women CEOs. Right. So either they've got to reach outside the box.
Or they're on 8 boards if you...
Right. Or women have to tap into the network and help people. We need to feed that and fuel that opportunity.
Okay, so I'm going to take after this. I'm going to ask Molly and then take questions from the audience. I know this is probably a great audience, a lot of questions around this. And Molly, because we're talking about sort of gender differences, you've been on the front lines. Give us some sense of, do you in fact notice differences either from people that are on your own team when you're talking to women that are leading companies, for example? We all talk about the lean in, you know. Has that been an issue in terms of even just women as sources? Talk about sort of what you see and what you feel might be different and sort of...
Yeah, I feel that we are, our team, our goal was to have our team look like the world around us, right? And it is exceptional how powerful that is in terms of our connectivity out to CEOs, out to entrepreneurs. People like, even if they're not looking exactly at you and you don't look exactly like them, the fact that you have a team that might represent part of who they are speaks volumes to them. Mm-hmm. So it's to that concept of team. You know what you're doing? You're showing respect. Mm-hmm. You're showing respect, and that you care, and to your core business, you really want to have some, some commonality. So it's really powerful. I just want to say, like, to Matt and Chris, it is so significant that you guys are as vocal as you are. I just have to say that because in the last, in the first decade when I started Solera, we spent so much time talking about this issue, right? How many conferences have we all been at where we all talked about it? And it was like a decade of talk. And then when you looked at the results, it was negligible progress. So we've thought about it and we've said, what is going to catalyze it so that the forward decade, and to the way you guys speak of accountability and measurability, I think is so important. And Helena, what you're doing is critical. And so but it's your leadership. It is that pressing and it is that not backing down that I think really is going to be able to affect change in a way that also is viewed as fair. Is viewed as fair change.
But when you're making investments, for example, as well, and I think that's a powerful point you just made, but with regard to, say, Annie's, I'm curious as to, do you feel it's harder to see the excellence sometimes in these companies? Because that's the one, Wall Street's supposed to be a place where, the cream will rise and it's all about the numbers. So I'm curious as to why we aren't seeing more companies run by women, for example, that are getting the investment. You see issues around venture capital, private equity, women don't ask, women don't negotiate. Is that true? Have you found yourself even, mentoring some of the, companies, the women that you invest in?
I would say, the biggest thing that surprised me about Solera, and I think it's probably another panel with in-depth psychoanalysis required, probably. But when I started Solera, the one thing I thought was, wow, it's such a mainstream business opportunity. There's so much talent out there that wants to be included and capability. The network of women in major business spots who want to help is profound. So we better go fast because in a good way, there's going to be tons of copycats. They're all going to figure it out. That'll be our social contribution to the world. Go, right? I want 25 little Soleras out there and build and grow. And that will be an awesome contribution. And there really aren't any. So 10 years later, so as we kind of joke, sometimes we say, I get that I'm a pioneer, but I didn't really think I'd still be so pioneering at this point, given it's such a great model and it's tangible results and all that. So I think that the way we think about it, to be sort of philosophical and keep the energy levels high, the opportunity is multiple times better than I ever would have thought. So everyone should come and do it. I think it's hard for people to accept change. And so I think we're different. And so even though we don't feel that different to ourselves, we are different, and new and different are just that. So it takes longer, and you just have to really continuously persevere and show the case and make the case, and then have have that sort of recognized. But my goal for the next decade is that there should be 20 other firms who look just like us and are out there, just getting it done.
But we all have biases, and we have biases, and I have biases, and we need to acknowledge it. That there's the research that shows that if there is a offering document or a fundraising document, and the only difference is a man and a woman's name, the man gets 3 times the money of the woman. And there's the article this month in Atlantic Magazine that talks about the confidence gap. And the research shows that we are all so drawn to confidence. It's so into our DNA that confidence is so appealing to us that even after someone has been proven to be incompetent, we are drawn to their confidence. And when I remember when I was running one of the firms that I ran, we had a group of regional directors. The fellow who would show up second to last in every ranking was so handsome and so tall and had such great posture and had such a deep voice and such an aquiline nose and he would always look towards the horizon. His dang name showed up on every single list for promotion because he was so confident. And I'd say, guys, he should be on the list for firing. But he looked so good.
And we're quoting him in the article, right?
He was so good.
He's the one who calls you back in 60 seconds to say, my favorite cookie, just a second. Chocolate chip. So it's like
great.
So it's
but we have these biases, and what I do fret about though, and this this advice for us women and for groups of women who want to get ahead, this advice is so valuable to us. However, what we risk at an extreme is that the value of diversity is diversity. And if we then try to, channel everybody to being overly confident and ask, demanding the raise and demanding the money and all this stuff, and I saw this on Wall Street, where you lose that value of diversity because those who make it at the top have learned how to play the game a certain way. And so smart management teams will get this, but it sure has taken them a while.
Okay. Do we have a question from the audience? Now we have to wait for the Magic Mike, which was a great movie. No, it wasn't a great movie, actually. I shouldn't say that. Good movie. But we have somebody question right here, and just introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi there. My name is Colin Tate from Australia. I'm curious, isn't it part of the key problem here that 3/4 of the panel are women and 3/4 of the people in this room are women?
Yep. So the echo chamber problem. Well, thank you for reducing the gender issue. Anybody want to talk about that?
I'm happy to start with that because I think that is one of the things that, of the 25 initial supporters of the 30% Club in the US, 21 are men. And it's been definitely a big part of the breakthrough in the UK that we've had business leaders, most of whom are obviously men, affecting the change. It's still been difficult, going back to the point about the CEOs, it's still been difficult to get, from, not trickle down as chairman to CEO necessarily, but it's been hard to get middle management after the CEO. We did a big study of the professional services firms, and actually it was quite depressing for the managing partners that you left their office, literally the people that reported to them, and the commitment to this issue fell away. So I think, one of the things we haven't really covered yet is, we all seem to be the converted, and you can end up preaching to the converted over and over, but actually the big challenge is getting the unconverted. And certainly I've seen people, there's different tactics for different groups, I've got to admit. Sally's talked a lot about the biases point, but I think that making it much harder in terms of hardwiring, having gender diversity and other sorts of diversity in teams, actually holding people's feet to the fire, as ludicrous about, let's get me some diverse candidates, really keep the pressure on is sort of like the starting point anyway, and gradually people come around.
And it is framing the story. So Matt, weigh in terms of just,
Yeah, I would just say, and Elena, as much as anyone, is an exemplar of this, is that the best way to get results is, first of all, to set clearly defined goals, numerical goals, and get everybody to agree that these goals are going to matter, and then hold people accountable. And it doesn't matter what the composition is in the room or up on the stage. Once you agree what your data is and how you're going to meet, your performance criteria, then it's simply execution. And then people start realizing the benefits, because there will be lots of benefits.
Do you think celebrate or shame? Both? I mean, in terms of, like Catalyst, for example, stopped publishing a list of the boards that had no women on it, because it was like diversity fatigue. It's not helpful. It's, it's us versus them. Do you agree?
Well, I really believe, as I said, that you're making a better product. You're making a better place. You're making a better community.
Framing.
So I don't think one has to go in a direction of embarrassing people or shame. I think it's far better to extol what the benefits are for all, men and women alike, and make it clear we're all in this together and we're all going to benefit. And, if you can prove that, then that has its own value going forward.
You want people to self-correct as well. I mean, I got off the plane after a trip to New York a few weeks ago, and there was an announcement about reaching 20.8% women on boards in the UK, great, and only 3 all-male boards left. One was the London Stock Exchange, and by the afternoon, they had announced the appointment of not just 1, but 2 female board directors. And then the following week, one of the other 2 all-male boards caved in, as it were. And then, the last one has sort of intimated they'll announce at the AGM. There will be no all-male boards in the FTSE, which is a huge change from where we were. But,
we have another question from the audience. Go ahead.
This is Elizabeth Hewitt with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And I work on the investment staff, and we have done a lot of research which shows that female-managed hedge funds have a better risk-adjusted return than the larger universe. It is a small data set, but it's very consistent over basically whatever time horizon you look at. But women hedge fund managers make up less than 2% of the population of hedge funds. So one of my questions is, how do you support women through that kind of fallout stage, which is such a challenge, having 9 children, having a daughter, I'm not sure.
I got them too.
You have them too, and it's it's a real struggle, and so in investments where the fallout rate is just so high, but women are really great at producing a better risk-adjusted return and more diversity for your portfolio. How do we get more women through that stage and have them succeed so other women can see, A, that it's possible, and B, that there's demand for, and an equal opportunity for them to have their success.
Any thoughts?
Just did a study in the UK. It was actually under Opportunity Now, part of the Prince of Wales business in the community, and 25,000 people filled it in, 23,000 women and 2,000 men, and it was called Project 2840. It's all about that danger zone for career divergence. And interestingly, the women said they are confident, they are ambitious, they do want to lead, and that they felt supported by their partners, but they did not feel supported by their employer. And I think it's just another call to action that we think we're doing the right thing because we're talking about it. I do think a lot of the initiatives within companies are too siloed about let's fix the women and not let's change our own culture. Over half of the 23,000 women who replied reported they'd been bullied or harassed in the last 3 years. And actually the control set, the men, said that they had seen the women being bullied or harassed. So we've still got a long way to go to get the culture right, I think.
Yeah. But I think some part of it's about networks, right? How are the guys, one of the things you didn't directly touch on is the guys are managing a lot more money. The women are a small percent, but my guess is that as the percent of, the number is the percent of the number of hedge fund managers out there is a certain number, but I'll bet the percent of money managed is a lower number. And some of it is awareness, some of it's network. I'm a little sheepish to tell you that, I ran Merrill and Smith Barney for years. And so for alternatives managers, there's a period of time when I was the belle of the ball. And, it was interesting because I, every couple of weeks, would have some 40-something-year-old, 35-year-old, something-year-old gentleman show up in my office who'd come by to have a cup of coffee. And some ways into the meeting, he would remember he was a hedge fund manager and that I ran, a platform that had a lot of hedge funds on it, and would ask to go onto the platform. It was interesting in all the years.
That wasn't why you wanted the coffee in the first place?
He was always sort of remembered it right in the middle of the meeting. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm a hedge fund manager and you run this business. And it was interesting. There were 2 breaks here, one of which is in all those years, I had 0 women come to visit me. 0. But you know what? In all those years, I was so busy running around running the business, I never thought to reach out to them either. I didn't, I was running the business. I didn't consider it to be my job. So there's a certain awareness that we need to have of it. And to everyone's point, it's the business case for it, right? These folks, small sample set, better returns, lower risk, perhaps greater diversification, not proved yet, right? That's a business case for it as opposed to sitting back and waiting.
Well, and also the customers. That's the low-hanging fruit because women also, that's an underserved customer
Don't
base.
even get me started.
They're so unhappy with.
Don't even get me started.
Okay, so I won't. I'm not going to get you started. Matt, you had a
Don't
point.
even
I was just
Sorry,
going to
that's
say,
a whole
speaking of culture, and something really important, for example, in London, International Money Center is a rowing race every year between Oxford and Cambridge, and the men are always celebrated, and we jumped on a story. Actually, Elena had a lot to do with it just a couple of years ago about how, for the first time, the race between men and women were going to be treated equally, and that they were going to be at the same time, roughly speaking, same day. And so for the first time culturally, you were going to see the competitiveness, the drive of women exactly at the same time, and all the people were going to see it. And that is a really big development. And then I'll say something else more recently, another story, the Boston Marathon, which was spectacular this year. And one of the things that we noticed was everybody instantly put out headlines of the man who won.
Right, the American.
But no one except us put out a headline, in a tweet of the woman who won. And that's culturally a very important thing, and it has to happen more often. That's
I just really think it's got to be the forward decade of goal setting, measure, and accountability. You can't just talk about general commitment.
So it's the outcomes, like thank you
We're
for the
ready
input.
for it. Everybody
and what have
knows
you
the
done?
case, right? I don't think there's any mystery about the case. I think it's asking for there to be, your comments, set your own goals. I'm going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to measure them and track them and follow. And I think you'll see results change because these are all business people, and they want to make the numbers.
Okay, I think we have time for another question. I think we've got somebody over there. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoever's got the cue. It's all one big blur of.
Hi. Can you just briefly touched on it, but will you talk about mentorship and the importance of it? And mentorship doesn't have to come necessarily in the form of woman to woman or an elderly to a younger woman. And I look in the audience here, and I do see a lot of younger women. And will you on the panel talk about one or two examples of a mentorship, how that worked, and then what you can advise us as older women, what we can do to be better mentors?
Can I also twist that a little bit since we're talking about the media context? I think I'd love some advice in the media.
Yeah. I don't think mentoring and the noun mentor is actually as important as the noun sponsorship. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I make a distinction is because you have to go into the situation that there's something fundamentally wrong. And you could have the best mentors in the world, but it's not clear, it's not guaranteed that you're going to correct what's wrong. So you have to have a sponsor or sponsors who are going to say, we are going to deal with this issue and we're going to deal with it systematically. Now, once you make that decision, then you say, how are we going to go about making this a reality? And in our case, we said, first of all, we're going to have numerical targets that we have to meet, and we're going to hold everybody accountable in terms of promotions and so on. So we're going to say to all our managers, look, this is not the problem anymore of the people who want to advance. This is your problem because you've got to figure out a way to get the gender gap to start narrowing throughout management. And you've got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. You can't be a bystander. The second thing is, it's important to have the best wisdom and advice. So we committed ourselves to having coaches come in, and their requirement is you've got to help these people succeed. and be at the top of the performance measures that we have. So it's a combination of things. So I think mentors are great. Don't get me wrong. But I think if you want to solve this gender gap, you have to have real sponsorship to make it work.
I agree entirely that it's a very valuable sort of step up from mentoring. One of the initiatives that we've had in the sort of pipeline side of the 30% Club has been this cross-company mentoring. And actually, I've been incredibly surprised by the feedback from both the mentees who've said it's been very liberating to be able to actually get advice from somebody who doesn't work in the same company as them. And that seemed to have broken a bit of an impasse in mentoring scheme where people sort of held back or felt that this might get back to their manager. And actually the mentors, most of whom are actually men, have reported, and you can, I suppose, read into this things that they should have known already, but just how impressed they've been with the women they've mentored, but also how it's opened their eyes to the issues that these younger women are facing. And one thing that I've noticed, it's hard for it does touch on sort of issues of etiquette in the office as well. When there's, I think, a bit of an impediment having older men sponsor younger women, can be misconstrued. This has given us sort of a bit of a framework that it's a relationship that's kind of like formalized and it's really worked surprisingly well. We will do that next year in the US.
It's not always one way. I think one thing I like to tell people is like, look, if you've got great women in the office, can you please put them forward and have them return our calls and not always have it be, now I'd like to speak for the companies. Like, let other people, other voices, because that's part of the challenge, is getting those voices in, is them being authorized, frankly, to speak to us. So I'm actually going to do the sum up lightning round and I want to just ask you each to give some final thoughts. It could be advice, it could be what's on your radar screen, but we're framing this in the context of the story as well. Since we do have an audience, I think, that buys into the idea that this matters, yet we haven't had traction on some of the things. You're still a pioneer, Molly. How do we give us some sense of what you'd like to leave as a takeaway to the audience? Matt, I'm going to start with you.
I think it comes down to a handful of words. Once you believe it, you got to say, go forth unafraid.
Good.
I'd say that we shouldn't get disheartened by the fact that we've been talking about this a long time. I think you can get to a tipping point and accelerate things pretty quickly, but it does take men and women working together on this issue, and that's what I hope we'll see a bit more of here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I agree with the premise of the panel, which is nice to-dos are great. They're great. This is the business case for it. Makes all the sense in the world, but it doesn't happen without the most senior level commitment and putting numbers around it. If the CEO of a company, the chairman of a company is not committed to it, you can have all the words you want to have, you can have your diversity day at the board, it's not going to happen. So it's got to have that kind of commitment to it before it can move forward.
And let's all hold all of ourselves to a real standard of accountability, be really hard on ourselves about what we're all doing to move it forward. And remember, we're not asking, none of us are, for superiority. You just want fair. You just want fair.
Chris thinks we're superior. No, go ahead.
No, my word is connect, connect, connect. Whether it's sponsorship, mentorship, I think women absolutely have to connect and have each other's back, and as we're saying, actually push. I still think change, as it was said, change is hard, so you have to do a combination of shame and inspire, but it has to be intentional.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel. And many more questions, I'm sure, so be sure to nab us as we step off stage. But thanks again for coming.